Hi. Today I'm meeting with Dr. Jaap Seidel, who is professor at VU University in Amsterdam, and I'll be talking to him about the current obesity epidemic and our ways to tackle this huge global problem. And specifically, we'll focus on changing the so-called obesogenic environment. Dr. Seidel, welcome to our MOOC. There's a lot of talk about obesity, and it seems that hardly any country escapes the current obesity epidemic. How bad is the situation really at this moment?
It's quite worrisome. The most current estimates are that around 30% of the world's population is either overweight or obese, and that it is still increasing very rapidly, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so the number is worrying, but especially also we are very conservative in our estimates. For example, we use BMI cut points to define overweight and obesity, which we know are very high for instance, Asian populations. So it may be that actually, 40–50% of the world population might be considered overweight or obese if you use the correct standards. So that's a lot of people, and the consequences are quite severe as well. So you think about non-communicable diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, which are becoming the largest burden of health globally.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are thinking about solutions, and many pharmaceutical companies are investing heavily in so-called anti-obesity drugs, and the overall outcome so far has been quite disappointing. What is your view on these drugs?
Yeah, there's not much promising on the horizon, I must say. That has to do with that most of these drugs try to interfere with our eating behavior. Appetite, food regulation, things like that. And these are very centrally regulated. So if you interfere with these processes in the brain, like the hypothalamus or other regions in the brain, there are lots of side effects because these are very general organs that organize a lot of emotions and feelings and behaviors. Mm-hmm. So most of the drugs that have been developed have been withdrawn from the market because of their severe side effects and their limited efficacy. And that means that drugs either need to be developed on another basis. For instance, there are very locally active drugs, like in the gastrointestinal region, like lipase inhibitors. They have limited effectiveness, but they do work without most of the central side effects and consequences. Okay. But on the whole, I would say development of drugs is not the answer to this epidemic, especially because it's very costly. You have to take them lifelong. They're usually not reimbursed by the health insurance companies, at least in most countries they are not, and these are rich countries. And particularly also because this becomes a poverty-related problem. Large city problems in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and in that case, obesity drugs are not a solution.
Mm-hmm. And do you think bariatric surgery is part of the solution? I mean, there's been a huge increase in bariatric surgeries for obesity.
It's part of the solution for the most severe cases. It sounds like an ideal fix. You just bypass a lot of the metabolism and the food uptake, and it is very effective, but it's also very costly, and it has a lot of side effects too. It needs lifelong supervision. There might be micronutrient deficiencies, there might be gastrointestinal problems, there might be reoperations necessary. So this is available for the tip of the iceberg, really, and for those countries and people that can afford it.
Mm-hmm. Now, many people believe that obese individuals should be personally held accountable for their obesity problems. And they say that if people can buy a house or buy a mortgage or buy a car or basically arrange their lives, why aren't they able to stay slim? I mean, isn't that something that they should be able to do by themselves?
Well, it's a little bit like, it's actually a myth that people are very well able to regulate their lives. It's like saying poverty is just a self-inflicted problem of people. They should just work harder. It's the same with obesity. Obesity is a normal response to an abnormal environment, which is greatly created by environmental factors, the food environment, socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, all kinds of other things. They start very early in life, before birth actually, but also in the first early years of life. And in addition to environmental effects, there are genetic effects. So how many people become obese in a population is just predicted by the environmental change, and who is going to be afflicted by obesity is determined by genes. So there's very little room for personal choice, if you see what I mean. It's very similar to poverty. You know, you can blame people for their poverty or their alcoholism or addictions or all kinds of other things, but it's usually environment and genes which are creating the problem.
Mm-hmm. Now, the last couple of years, you've focused your research efforts on changing the so-called obesogenic environment. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this obesogenic environment? What is it really?
Yes. Well, it's really the physical, socio-cultural and economic environments in which people live. They are conducive to obesity, and this is reflected by the huge differences between countries, but also within countries, within cities, and even neighborhoods, that you see differences in groups of people that have or don't have a lot of obesity. For instance, in Amsterdam, it's a good example. In some of the neighborhoods, it's less than 10%. In others, it's more than 30%. About 3/4 of the Amsterdam obese children live in 2 or 3 neighborhoods out of the, say, 12 or 15. That means it's very unequally distributed. And if you look at the environments in which these children grow up, it is neighborhoods with a safety problem, with lots of traffic, with very little opportunities for physical activity, with a very unhealthy food environment, with schools that don't pay a lot of attention to healthy eating, to intense marketing of unhealthy food products, much more clearly there than in other neighborhoods. So it's a whole list of factors that actually are creating unhealthy lifestyles, if you like. So if people have 2 jobs and they have 3 children, they have no money for a sport club, and there's no opportunity for safe playgrounds, then children stay at home and watch television or sit behind a computer, and what they do is snacking. You know, so it's something which is already originating in very early stages of life. You see the differences between populations in the degree of obesity already at 5 months. You know, basically they're already there, and then it's just going to be worse over time. That means that you have to create environments, micro-environments, which means schools, homes and neighborhoods, but also macro-environments like cities and public transportation, prices of food, education systems, things like that, that are really conducive to health-related behaviors that lead eventually to obesity and a host of other problems. So to paraphrase this, you're actually thinking about the upstream problems that are creating the downstream effects, like obesity. And instead of working in the downstream obesity, you know, you have to eat less and you have to exercise more, is actually to look at, can we provide opportunities for people to be physically active, to make the healthy choice available and attractive? And that's the way actually that most public health problems are being solved. If you think about solving any public health problem, from infectious diseases to cancer, it is always that you have a vector, you have a host, and you have an environment. And we know from 200 years of public health experience that if you don't address all 3, you're not going to be very effective. And so environment is one of those aspects that is really very crucial, and that needs to be modified so that people can lead healthy lives and make the healthy choices.
Mm-hmm. And can you give examples of specific measures where you were able to reduce, or other people were able to reduce the obesogenic environment that actually turn out to be quite effective.
Yes, actually they are the only long-term effective examples that I know. Most short-term interventions that we know are on individual advice on dietary advice, physical activity advice. They are usually effective to a moderate degree on a short-term basis, and then people relapse. You know, it's the general pattern that we see in almost any individualized intervention. The more environmental interventions, which create healthier environments, so that people will actually be more physically active and make healthier choices because of a healthier food environment, are shown to be effective. And again, give you an example of some towns in France where they actually looked at school meals, at families and at neighborhoods, and they created healthier environments, and they were able to actually reduce the prevalence of obesity compared to control towns by about 50%. So in the control towns, obesity increased over time, whereas in the intervention towns it actually leveled off. And very importantly also, it decreased the health inequalities. So there's lots of inequalities, there's lots of obesity in the low socioeconomic classes, very little obesity there, and most of the effects were seen in the lower socioeconomic groups. So that actually you're not just reducing overall obesity, but you're also reducing inequalities, which is a very important point in our public health ambitions.
Mm-hmm. And what specific measures do you think are going to be the most promising in the future?
Well, it is these integrated measures. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, take an example, drinking water in schools. We've tried that with several interventions. One was to remove the vending machines from the schools. Another one was to introduce water drinking opportunities, so fountains and coolers and things like that, so that children could drink water, and the staff could drink water as well when they wanted. And that's free, so it's easy to do that. But we realized that actually most of the sugar-sweetened beverage, 90% or more, actually are drank at school, but taken and bought outside the school. They bring it from home or they buy it somewhere else in the supermarkets because it's much cheaper than the vending machine at school. So you need to address the family environment, the supermarket environment, if you like, as well as the school environment, and then you're effective. So we've seen that doing this on the three levels, it became effective in changing the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages and replacement by water. If you don't do the three and you just do one, you're very limited in effectiveness because the problem just changes position. You know, the purchase of sugary beverages changes from the school environment to the home environment, or the supermarket environment, or the food service sector environment.
Right. Okay. Now, finally, is there anything in particular that we haven't discussed yet, and that you would like to share with our students that you think it's important to stress in the context of nutrition, and particularly perhaps in the context of obesity? Yes.
Maybe I didn't stress enough that the problem of obesity and unhealthy lifestyles start within the first 1,000 years of conception. So that means after conception and then the first 2 years after birth. This is where most of the metabolic programming occurs. This is where most of the behavior is learned, the conditioning of behaviors, the development of taste preferences, the motoric skills, micro and macromotoric skills are developed, and that in that period, and they have lifelong lasting effects. And so if you want to do something which is most effective, start early in life. Start in young women and men who want to become parents. So it's that, and it's a lifelong life course perspective that you need to take also, which starts with parents who become fathers and mothers of children, and then they need to be very, very aware of their influence and the profound impact early influences have on the future of their children, so in the first, second years or so. But then they need to actually continue that kind of attention during the rest of that life. So it's two things, or three things, basically, which are the take-home message. If you want to prevent non-communicable diseases and obesity, you have to think about the upstream factors that are really shaping behaviors in a broad sense, and you have to start early. That is the second one. And the third one is that you have to actually take a life course approach to this.
Okay. Well, Dr. Seidel, thank you very much for your time and your willingness to talk to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.